Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Johnny's Report. And this is, of course, a special Johnny's Report as St. John's not only wins tonight against Georgetown by a final score of 72-69, not only do they keep what would have been a pretty bad loss off their resume, not a horrendous loss. I think you would have been looking at possibly a quad 2 loss, maybe borderline quad 3. Trying to remember exactly where Georgetown is in the net rankings. So, you keep your, all things considered, you keep probably about a 5 seed, 6 seed, potentially still there. You get the win, but most importantly, you get the win on senior night. Being honored tonight, Bryce Hopkins, Oziah Sellers, Hanjay Tamba, Dylan Mitchell, and of course, the man of the hour, the man of the last 3 years, Zuby Ejiofor. Zuby Ejiofor, whom Rick Pitino spoke after the game, said that St. John's wouldn't be anything without Zuby Ejiofor, saying that Zuby Ejiofor has meant that much to the St. John's program, talking about how the building is filled up because of number 24 in the red and white. And for the most part, it is true. I mean, what that guy has meant to the program, I jokingly say it, but I'm half serious. I mean, the guy deserves the keys to the campus for what he has meant to St. John's in these last 2 seasons. And it's even more impressive when you consider the fact that, the guy, it's not like he started off gangbusters at St. John's. I mean, had to work his way to being, the backup big there for Joel Soriano. And when it came time for Soriano to move on, and not only that, but when it came time to where, Soriano maybe didn't have his best night out there 2 years ago, Zuby obviously filled in well with big minutes. I mean, there were times where you heard pundits say, hey, maybe they need to look to give Zuby the minutes over Soriano. Maybe Zuby should be starting over Joel Soriano. But obviously, he came into his own last year. He has meant so much to the St. John's team. You cannot play up enough what he has provided to St. John's, and he did once again here tonight, but he wasn't alone. I mean, Joe Sonsana, I talked about it before the UConn game, the most recent UConn game, and said that, we've kind of been waiting to see a Joe Sonsana game here, and it turned out that, he was the leading scorer in that game against UConn, and jokingly I said, well, there's your Sannon game, I suppose. But he had one tonight. He had a tremendous second half, 15 points, made 3 3-pointers, really looked good. And it was good to see because Ian Jackson did not build off that Villanova win. Now, granted, Ian did not and wasn't given maybe the most, I guess, opportunities to be able to really shine in this game. I mean, it kind of felt like with the way things were going for St. John's, the leash was short tonight. Playing to the trend and playing towards what was ultimately going on for St. John's on the floor, they decided, hey, let's go with Joe Son, let's go with Darling, and let's roll with it and see what happens. And fortunately, Rick was able to come out with the win. Again, being down 12, you knew that from what Georgetown has shown you this year, the possibility was there for St. John's to be able to get back into the game and pull it out. And that's exactly what happened. Using the energy and, the energy of Madison Square Garden and the energy that Zuby Ejiofor was providing them, that ultimately helped them to get the win. We're going to talk about it more, the comeback and all that, but first, a message from the sponsor here, Home Field Apparel. We take a break in this episode to talk to you about Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel is your one-stop shop for everything Big East, and of course, the team we care about here, your St. John's Red Storm. Make sure you head over to homefieldapparel.com now and order some of their many merchandise as we wind down this season and we continue to make our way through this harsh winter in this Northeast. Go do yourself a favor and go to their website now and order one of their many uniquely styled jackets. And might I even recommend the 1985 bomber jacket as the Johnnies look to party like it's 1985 as we continue to move forward through this season. Now back to the episode. Thanks to the assist from Rasheen there, a quad 3 win is what it is for St. John's. So quad 3 win tonight. So yeah, you would have avoided a bad loss at the hands of the Hoyas. Now, Georgetown took an 8-point lead into the half. Mac was having a big night. You know, Mulready had a pretty solid first half shooting. I think he had about 6 points, and then he had a pretty tremendous second half as well. But him, Mac, Jeremiah Williams, who had a big N1 opportunity at the end there, which we'll talk about in a second. Bryce Hopkins just let him have it. But obviously, he got a little help from Williams on the free throw. But you get into the second half, you're down 8, and then Isaiah Sellers and Zuby Ejiofor, they bring you to within 4, and then Mulready makes a jumper. Zuby answers. Mulready bangs a 3. Next thing you know, Georgetown's up 9, then 10, then 12. And it suddenly got to the point to where it was like, all right, under 14 minutes to play, we've been here before throughout just about, 3-4 times in conference play. That might just be off the top of my head. It's probably even more than that. But we've been down before. We know what this team can do with its backs against the walls. They're going to have to do it one more time. And they did it once again. Buoyed by Zuby Ejiofor and Sannon. Sannon, who knocked down a 3 to pull you within 4 again after Ian Jackson going on a nifty run on his own. He had the N1 on the continuation, which I think certainly had Ed Cooley up in arms, had, I'm sure, Hoya Nation up in arms. I think had the broadcasters up in arms because they weren't exactly sure. I mean, looks like they gave them the gather and the continuation. It's the NBA continuation N1 to go to the line. It's kind of a judgment call at the ref's distinction. You're at the mercy of the whistle there in that moment. Whether or not the foul should be granted or the shot should be granted rather. And that's what happened to Ian. Got to the line, and then funny on the other end, it was those only points of the night, but Vinci Uchukwu with the monster dunk to put Georgetown back up 10. So granted, I think it would have been an 11-point lead had Ian just went to the line and made 2 free throws. But then Sannon knocks down a 3. Dylan Mitchell pulls you to within 5. Then it turns into the Malik Mack show where he goes on a 5-point stretch on his own. He takes Georgetown on a nifty little run there. After Santa makes a 3 to cut it to 4, he gets it to back in 7 with an N1 trip for himself. So really what you're watching is, in this moment, you're kind of saying to yourself, man, this is where the game's going to be won and lost. Is Georgetown going to have another moment where they can't put a team away and collapse late, or what are we going to see here? And St. John's, once again, buoyed by Zuby and Josan. Sannon gets to the line, cuts it to 5. Zuby and N1 trip the next time, cuts it to 2. And then it was Zuby, Darling, and Ejiofor to take St. John's the rest of the way, going on an 8-0 run to put themselves up 4 to take a 61-57 lead. Sannon buries a 3 after Georgetown cuts it to a 1-point game, and St. John's leads by 4. Now, with the 4-point lead at 66-62, we'd seesaw again with Mulready to pull you to within 1. And then St. John's just willing themselves to the win, attacking inside, finding Sellers underneath, or I think Sellers actually found the ball underneath on this play to put you up by 3. And then next, you get a stop. Next time down, Sannon, again, the Josan Sannon game, as he gets to the cup and lays it in. But to me, up 3 after the Mac made jumper, after a timeout, St. John's comes down. They don't get Zuby a look, which I thought was a mistake to not get a look. And they said it on the broadcast. A mistake not to get Zuby a look. You go downhill. Bucket doesn't go. Ball's loose on the ground. Tie up. Ball to Georgetown. And then you put it in the hands of Jeremiah Williams, who had been hot in the second half. And down 3, I mean, the question is, do you foul? You know, what do you do if you're St. John's? Is it maybe too early to start fouling? Granted, it's potentially the final whistle of the game or final play of the game. You know, shot clock turned off and everything. It depends upon really how willing Georgetown is to let the clock run. And Jeremiah Williams gets downhill. And Bryce Hopkins contests the shot. And if you're Bryce Hopkins, just let him have it. I mean, let him have the layup. I get you don't want it to get to a 1-point game, but if he has beaten you, let it go. And fortunately, Williams gets to the line, who's a 4-for-4 shooter, but a 62% free throw shooter on the season. And I'm watching the game with my dad. My dad said, "Oh, he's going to make it here. He's 4-for-4 tonight." I said, 62% on the season. This is with pressure. And he misses it. Too strong. Bryce grabs the rebound. And, I mean, it's kind of poetic in a way because obviously what happened in the offseason where Georgetown thinks they're getting Bryce Hopkins, and he obviously goes to St. John. So, you know, it's kind of poetic. The ball ends up in his hands. Poetic, he fouls him to get him to the line to tie it. Poetic, it ends up in his hands. He's fouled. He goes to the line, makes up for the stupid foul on the other end, puts St. John's back up 3. And then obviously they're able to force a really tough shot at the end there. And again, you talk about poetic, ball ends up in Zuby's hands after Caleb Williams misses from deep. So just for St. John's, I mean, it's a win. You get it in the book and you get out of Dodge. I mean, I don't know really what else to tell you. I don't know if this win really says anything about St. John's. I'll tell you this, the last 3 games, the worst possible way that they've played, or the worst, most horrendous we've seen them play ever, and really, well, potentially ever, depending upon how you look at it, against UConn. Then you look at some really good against Villanova, and then you look at in the middle against Georgetown. Now, mind you, Georgetown is not I know their record is what it is, but there's a lot there with Georgetown. And we say it every year. It feels like every year it's like, hey, if they just do this in the transfer portal, if they can just get this, they can just build momentum heading into the offseason and into next year, Georgetown will for sure be a possible tournament team. At least they'll be on the bubble. And we say that year in and year out. And because you see games like this where they come out and they look really good. Now, mind you, St. John's blew them out earlier in the season. They really did a good job pressing Georgetown. One thing, you give Georgetown credit for the majority of this game, I would say, is, and this was in the first half, was they didn't turn the ball over, only committed 5 turnovers. In the second half, they did turn it over 9 times. And St. John's, off of turnovers, obviously that just gives St. John's momentum in and of itself. It gives them energy. They got 9 points off turnovers. So, you look at the amount of turnovers that they were able to get against Georgetown. Didn't necessarily kill Georgetown, but it still tilted momentum in favor of St. John's. And obviously it continued for Georgetown into a long scoring drought. As we saw, they went through multiple minutes of, 3 points in the last 4 minutes, 0 points in the last 2 minutes. So you looked at what Georgetown learned from the first game and in the second game, and then you see St. John's being able to adjust and correct course, and that obviously helped them to get the win ultimately here this evening at MSG. Now, people said after the game they never would have forgiven St. John's to lose on Zuby's night, honoring him. Really, senior night as a whole, I mean, you never want to send the seniors off with a loss. That's just, especially for a team and a program like St. John's with what they've been able to achieve in the last 3 years, you never want to go off on that note. And fortunately, St. John's didn't here this evening. But more about what this says about St. John's and everything. I don't think this is anything to get too alarmed at. Georgetown has played UConn. They played Villanova very hard all year. If they just controlled business in conference play against lesser teams and then stolen one against UConn, beaten Villanova when it looked like they may have had them, and maybe even tonight against St. John's, Georgetown's a probable tournament team, I'd say. And again, this is where we come back to and say, if only they can just do this in the offseason, then they'll be here. Then they'll be on a bubble team. And it's something, if you listen to Rasheen and I on the Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast the other day, I have been very interested in what has transpired with Georgetown throughout the last however many years, and thought that this year, with the momentum that I figured they were building throughout the majority of last year into this season, thought Georgetown possibly could be on their way to making the tournament. I forget where I had them in my preseason prediction in that episode I did with Thomas. I think probably mid-pack of the Big East, and lo and behold, they just could not get over the hump. And tonight was just another example of them not getting over the hump, and not saying that I wanted them to, but it's just kind of one of those things where you look at it from the outside, and for me personally, I mean, I remember in the JT3 era at Georgetown where they were in the tournament. I mean, the one year they were the 2 seed. They never really went on a big Final Four run, but they were a good team. I mean, in a way, they were, at times what, I guess what St. John's maybe has been in these last 2 years. Do we expect this to be a Final Four team? Probably not. Last year, maybe you did, and obviously they didn't, come through with that. But, at least Georgetown didn't have to pull themselves out of the depths of hell to get to those successful seedings, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. So it's different in that regard. But they were at the very least a tournament team, and they were a relevant team. So again, it's kind of just this, it's this wonderment for me. And I think a lot of people that, remember obviously Georgetown being what Georgetown was for all those years, and why they've kind of fallen on such hard times here recently. But tonight, again, was another example of Georgetown potentially being, a team that could be, again, a year away from maybe being like a year away from actually being something that could, win a conference title. But back to what this means for St. John's, back to Zuby Ejiofor as we'll wind things down here. Coming off his triple-double against Villanova, coming off, which came off one of his worst performances, actually probably his worst performance ever against UConn, and on senior night, he again showed his will to win. 23 points, 7 boards, 5 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals in 33 minutes. The man was a menace tonight at MSG. He did and has done everything so well for St. John's. the ability to be able to have such a presence inside on the offensive end, the ability to knock down his free throws at the line. He's not a liability there. Play the tough defense he has, in which case, teams aren't going to be able to penetrate St. John's in the inside. And then obviously, I think what you've seen with Ruben Prey, you can even kind of say, well, that's the veteran presence of Zuby Ejiofor, because Prey's gotten better as this year has gone on. Now, he maybe didn't have his best night tonight. Pretty decent game on the defensive end in the 7 minutes that he played. And in my preview with Rasheen, I actually mentioned he would be the player I would look out for to, not one of the bigger names on St. John's team like Zuby, Bryce, whatever have you. And obviously only finished with a point in 7 minutes. But I think that Ruben's elevation this year also goes with having to go up against Zuby every day in practice and the leadership that Zuby has brought to him and this team. You don't win 15 out of your last 16 games after the start St. John's had without having great leaders in that locker room, like Zuby, like Dylan, and the veterans, that maybe aren't the guys that get the most praise for being vocal leaders like Bryce or Oziah, but those two guys on senior day did such a tremendous job for St. John's as well in this season. And I mean, it really has been a remarkable regular season thus far, and we hope it finishes with one more win against Seton Hall coming up. Now, this game against Seton Hall, Friday at 9 o'clock, very late, and kind of a strange 9 o'clock tip for a Friday night game on the East Coast. I mean, we're not looking at a game against, UCLA, but you look at Seton Hall right now, from what I'm looking at, this is according to Lenardi, Hall is not on the bubble. They were, a first 4 out, next 4 out team. They need a statement win. I mean, truly, for the sake of the conference last Saturday against UConn, I was saying just either A, hold on, or B, just put an asterisk next to it. It's a quad 1 win. Because for the love of God, the amount of close quad 1 wins Seton Hall probably should have, at this point, just give it to them. And then you see Ohio State beat Purdue the next day. But for the sake of the conference, they're just getting bodies in. You would have liked to have seen Seton obviously beat UConn last week, and maybe that could have gotten them in. Of course, who knows that they're not even on the bubble still. Who knows what that would have done. But they beat Xavier tonight. So, you avoid what probably would have been looked at as a bad loss there. And this game against St. John's, this is going to be for their everything, a chance to get in. And we remember earlier in this conference season, I mean, how could you forget what was a rough and tumble, beating and banging game at Madison Square Garden? And Seton Hall is going to be ready for that one coming up later on this week, Friday at 9 o'clock. Should be another excellent Big East matchup, a game that, for St. John's, you want to ride the momentum. You don't want to go into the conference tournament with a loss. And obviously, it's going to be a beating and banging game at Prudential Center, and we'll see what St. John's comes out with. So that's going to do it for us here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to put this out. It'll be in the obvious live category there on the Big East Energy Network YouTube page. So if anyone missed it, I don't know why I'm yelling it into the microphone here, because obviously this isn't a message for the people that are tuning in right now, but if you missed it or you want to go back and listen to the beginning portions, you'll be able to. We'll post a link, and obviously everyone can check out this recap of St. John's beating Georgetown at Madison Square Garden, 72-69. Tremendous night for St. John's. Zuby Ejiofor, Joe Sansanin, Rick Pitino, who had the, tears in his eyes as he introduced Zuby to the crowd, and obviously spoke very fondly of his center tonight after the game. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.